talking about plant response to stimuli, the first part. So even though we don't think of plants as being complex or having a brain, they still can respond to things that go on in their outside environment. The particular mechanisms with which they respond, we'll talk about today, are hormones and photoresponses. So two things that they use to respond to stimuli are the regulation of hormones and the response to light. So plant hormones, also called growth factors. Hormones are different chemicals that are released in small quantities that travel around an organism and stimulate different cellular responses. So for example, insulin in humans travels around and stimulates cells to absorb blood glucose. Hormones in animals travel through the blood, but since there's no blood in plants, plant hormones are often called growth factors. So plant hormones and plant growth factors are really synonymous. These growth factors, when they're released in plants or travel through the vasculature in plants, signal different plant cells to carry out specific functions. One such hormone that you should be familiar with is called AUXIN. AUXIN is responsible for phototropism. So phototropism, photo means light, tropism means tendency, is the tendency for a plant to grow or bend towards the light. So if you have a plant on your windowsill, all the leaves and things will tend to grow towards the light, and that's response to AUXIN. AUXIN is released from cells near the tip of the plant, so near the tip, kind of called the coleoptile, and travels downward and becomes less concentrated the farther down you go. Plants that are stimulated by AUXIN tend to grow faster than cells that are around it. So for example, when part of a plant is overhead, when sunlight is overhead of a plant, the AUXIN travels pretty much uniformitarily down that plant and stimulates all of the cells below it to grow straight up towards the sun. However, once the sunlight shines on the plant at an angle, the AUXIN molecules move and start to accumulate towards the far side of the plant and stimulate these cells to grow much faster. This causes the plant to bend towards the sun. Cell elongation on that side causes the plant to bend towards the sun. In fact, if you cut off the tip or the coleoptile of a plant and place an agar cube under it, this AUXIN will diffuse and saturate the agar cube. Then if you place parts of this agar cube on only half of the stem, the AUXIN will travel straight down from the agar cube, stimulate this side of the plant to bend, and it will artificially bend as if there is a sun right here. So that's the role of AUXIN. There's some other plant hormones. So cytokinins are responsible for stimulating cell division primarily, cyto as in cytokinesis and cell division. They also stimulate seed and fruit growth and nutrient transport. Gibberellins, derived from gibberellic acid, stimulate stem elongation and fruit growth and help start seed germination. Abscisic acid is really important. It fosters seed dormancy, so it's what keeps seeds dormant when there's not very favorable conditions for them to germinate, and plays a major role in drought tolerance. So the presence of abscisic acid helps helps promote drought tolerance in plants. And then there's ethylene. Ethylene is really important because it stimulates the ripening of fruit. That's why if you put fruit in a bag, a brown paper bag, it will ripen more quickly because that ethylene is trapped in the paper bag. And it also controls what's called the triple response in plants, which we'll talk about here in the next page. Here is a brief table that kind of summarizing different plant hormones. ABA is abscisic acid and their jobs, and here is a picture of these different plant hormones. I would just be familiar with mainly ethylene, definitely be familiar with ethylene, and definitely be familiar with AUXIN. The other are nice to know, but definitely know AUXIN and ethylene for the AP test. The triple response in plants is how plants react when they're growing and they're running into a hard object. and is controlled again by ethylene. So when a plant that's growing hits something hard, so let's say it's growing and there's a brick. Maybe this is the dirt and it is running into pavement. Ethylene is released by this tip, and it causes the stem to slow its elongation, to thicken at this tip, and then to curve and to start to grow sideways. And it's going to grow sideways until there isn't an obstacle here. It might try to turn up and grow, but then it'll hit this obstacle again. More ethylene will be released. It'll thicken, stop elongating, thicken, and swing sideways here until it reaches the surface, until it goes around, starts to be able to grow up and down again. So here's an example of plants that are subjected to different levels of auxin, or different levels of ethylene here. And the more ethylene that they're subjected to, the more drastic the curvature of the plant. So no ethylene will drop pretty much straight up. Lots of ethylene, a very drastic curve. So you can kind of see how ethylene levels are related to the intensity of the triple response. Also, senescence, or the loss of leaves in trees, is caused by a change in the auxin to ethylene ratio. As ethylene accumulates in a plant and auxin decreases, it causes plants to lose their leaves or draw out the nutrients in the leaves and eventually lose them and die, like during the winter. Lastly, it's really important that plants are able to respond to light. So light responses are called phototropic responses, or photomorphogenesis. So plants respond to light in many different ways. Phototropism, which we've already talked about, is how plants tend to grow towards the light to maximize photosynthesis. Photomorphogenesis is how the light induced changes in a plant to grow and develop. So how light can change how a plant grows and develops. And photoperiodism is the change in a plant that are signaled by variation of light hours or light quality, so day versus night, or seasons especially. And photomorphogenesis causes etiolation, or the greening of leaves, and it prevents plants from greening underground. So pretty much plants won't start sprouting leaves and other shoots until it's in the light. So it doesn't waste that energy trying to produce leaves in the ground when it hasn't reached the surface. Plants also respond to blue light and red light because they have blue light photoreceptors and red light phytochromes. Red light seems to stimulate seed germination, whereas far red light seems to inhibit it. So when red light is shown on seedlings, they tend to germinate more quickly. Kind of as you see right here, red light stimulates these phytochromes, which then helps to activate secondary messengers, which act as transcription factors to move along seed germination. This quality of light response via phytochromes is also responsible for plants' quote-unquote shade avoidance ability, so to grow out of the shade. And that has to do with red and far red light. In sunlight, there is more red light than far red light. However, in the shade, like shaded by other plants, the red light is often taken up for photosynthesis by the plant's leaves above the plant that's being shaded, and more far red light reaches this plant below, which then causes it to grow at angles and out of the way of this shade. So far red light that is activating certain phytochromes cause these plants to grow out of the shade, responding to that shade stimuli. And last but not least, there's photoperiodism, which is the response of plants to different periodic exposures to light. Many processes like transpiration and enzyme synthesis undergo daily oscillation. So even when their plants are in growing chambers or exposed to artificial light, some plants maintain their circadian, or 24-hour, rhythm of stomatal opening and closing, even if light's shown on them all the time. One example of photoperiodism is short and long night or day plants. Night length is crucial in telling these plants when to sprout and to grow. So for example, in a short day / long night plant, the amount of darkness that a plant gets is crucial. If the darkness is not enough, too much daylight, it won't bloom. If it has a less amount of daylight, the critical night length, these long night or short day plants will bloom. Similarly, long day plants need beyond a certain period of daylight before they will bloom. If they don't have that amount of daylight, they won't bloom. Both plants, though, if you interrupt their night period with a flash of light, will bloom. So, interrupting the night period by exposing them to light will cause them to artificially bloom if they're a long day plant, or not bloom if they're a long night plant. So if we have a long night plant, and even if the total amount of night is over the threshold, if we expose them to some light in between in their night period, it will prevent growth or blooming. Long day plants, though, even if the daylight hours have not reached this critical threshold, if we expose them to light in the night hours, it will stimulate this blooming response. And this is why flower blooming can be traced to the seasons. It's all of the changing days and light hours. Phytochrome stimulation is also important in combination with other environmental factors. So sometimes not only will night or day length matter by itself, but also exposure to cold or warmth. So one way to trick flowers into blooming is, besides doing this light trick, is to expose them to colder temperatures. Flowers would think it's later in the year, and with the light period, especially in long day plants growing shorter, will trick them into blooming, and that's what a lot of artificial plant growers do. Lastly, there is some experimental evidence, though it's not very detailed, that there is a gene, or not a gene, but a hormone responsible for different flower blooming technique, artificial flower blooming techniques. For example, this plant, a short day plant grown under short conditions, will still flower sometimes. And long day plants grafted to short day plants, induced to grow by transmission of phlorogen across the graft. So not just do photoperiodism determine the blooming patterns, but it seems there must be some chemical that's traveling from this short day plant to this long day plant, causing it to bloom even in a short day scenario. This long day plant is still blooming because this chemical phlorogen is being transmitted from these short day plants that are making the phlorogen, since it's a short day situation, to this long day plant. Alright, we'll look more over that here on Thursday, but if you have any questions, just let me know.